everyone, and welcome to the McGuckin Group podcast. We thoroughly enjoy all our listeners joining us, and more importantly, we enjoy our guests that join us. And today I am thrilled to have Jim Francis from Mayo Clinic. I'm going to let Jim introduce himself, tell you a little bit about his history and what he does, and then we're going to dive in. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Audrey. It's a pleasure to be with you and to see you again, and look forward to our conversation today. I am the supply executive at Mayo Clinic, and I'm in my 25th year here. I'm responsible for helping manage about $6.5 billion in supplies and pharmaceuticals and purchase services activities. But I'm very fortunate to have a staff of about 850 people in supply chain and another 3 people in healthcare technology management, which is part of my responsibilities too. Many years ago, I was trained as a hospital administrator and was given the opportunity to lead the supply chain at BJC Healthcare in St. Louis when that merger was coming together. And today, besides my primary responsibility for supporting the practice and the education, research activities, and diversified other services that Mayo Clinic provides, we've been fortunate enough to commercialize about 6 businesses, and we have 2 more under development here. So it's a very busy organization.
Yes, indeed. And just when you were talking about being trained as a hospital administrator, my daughter Hannah is studying public health administration at University of Tampa. So that was just a nice connection. But Jim, you and I have a couple of other connections. Wondered if you could talk a little bit about the work you do with SMI and being on that board and the work we're doing together.
Yeah, I serve as an advisor to SMI, and SMI stands for Strategic Marketplace Initiative. It's been in existence now for 20 years. Actually, this is its 20th anniversary, and I've been fortunate enough to participate since the very beginning of that organization. It's a network of both providers, supply chain executives that work for healthcare providers, and supplier industry representatives. And we're focused on issues that are impactful on the healthcare supply chain and trying to make improvements and activities associated with the supply chain operation. It's been a great organization. I consider it to be one of the more successful networks out there. And we're fortunate to have such a great group of people that lead SMI.
Yes, indeed. We have such dear clients, all the way from Johnson & Johnson to Baxter Healthcare and gosh, and a number of other clients that are all members of SMI because they see it with such credibility and such opportunity. And one of the other things that we're supporting SMI with is their Women Leader Program, which has been wildly successful in the past few years. So we're excited to partner with you on that. But today, Jim, what I like to do is we have a lot of our listeners in healthcare and a lot of our listeners in supply chain, and being able to hear from such a veteran like yourself is really powerful and really, it just adds so much value. And I'd love to open up the conversation and gain your perspective on what are you seeing some of the challenges are in healthcare, and how has that been pulled through all the way from probably even before COVID, and what are you seeing, Jim?
Yeah, great question, Audrey. I've been in the industry now 40 years, so I've seen my share of change. One thing that's very true about healthcare, it's a very dynamic and complex industry, and it sees its fair share of change fairly continuously. So it's a challenging profession, but it's also a very rewarding one for people that work in healthcare. And that's because you're here and you're dedicated to helping people when maybe they're not their best. And that's true about whether you're talking about patients that come to healthcare providers or staff that you're working with, to take care of other people. I've often shared that the pandemic, which believe it or not, was now 4 years ago, the start of, which time has really, really flown. But it was probably one of the more stressful times in my professional career through the pandemic, given everything that was going on. Um, and I would tell you that while we had our share of challenges at that time, those challenges have continued in many ways. We still have a fair number of supply disruptions and so forth. So recently I heard someone say that the clinical pandemic is over, but the supply chain pandemic is continuing. And it is true. We have seen that. So no doubt there were many lessons that we learned and many changes that we have made, some transformational across our supply chain to respond better to these types of situations if and when they happen again. We've encountered many other challenges coming out of the pandemic. Those include, in general, inflation. We've seen some pretty strong financial headwinds across the industry, and in many cases, those financial headwinds are continuing, and one of the primary drivers is inflation that we've seen, not only in products and services, but also in labor, and kind of some of the shortages that we've seen in labor. The inflation associated with that has been to make corrections in wages and other activities that are meaningful to your employees, which are the backbone of the organization. We've seen, as a result of some of the challenges that we've experienced, a return to fairly aggressive spend management activity, where we're working daily as an organization to save money and bring greater value to the organization because of these types of challenges that we're experiencing. And probably one of the bigger impacts that we've seen and that is a challenge today is just the change in the work environment. In November of 2020, we were asked to go home and work remotely. And thank goodness for technology and the ability to communicate with one another, because it was completely new to all of us. At this point in time, there's no indication that we'll return to an in-office environment. So we've embraced this model of remote working, and the large portion, probably about 50% of the supply chain, are working remotely, except for those that have direct patient engagement. So these are the people that are running the day-to-day operations and are on site and delivering supplies. I could go on and on about the number of challenges coming out of the pandemic, but I think I'll stop there and see kind of what follow-up you might have with that.
Thanks for that, Jim, and taking us on that journey, and serves as a reminder. Goodness, 4 years, it doesn't seem like that. But one thing I was curious about is that you said that you've led a number of transformation efforts. And I wondered, could you share one of those, transformation efforts and share that with our audience?
Yeah, a lot of change that came out of the pandemic related to how we approach business continuity and resiliency and ensuring that supplies are available for our patients. So many of the changes that we implemented were a direct result of what we experienced during the pandemic, which really relate to not knowing whether or not you had enough supplies to take care of patients during the pandemic. So we've moved to a new operating model with our distribution partner that now services the Mayo Clinic and its affiliates and entities, very different than it was during the pandemic years. We've returned to an on-site warehouse type operation where we have redundancy built into our supply chain. So besides the products that we have in our par rooms and locations for servicing our caregivers, we now have redundancy built into the organization through several layers of available supplies. So beyond that par level location, we have redundancy with what our warehouse may have on site. And then we have redundancy what our distribution partner has. A key feature of that activity is transparency and visibility to where those supplies are located and how much we have available. So we have a fairly automated supply chain too. I would tell you, Audrey, that without that visibility, I'm not sure how we would have made it through the pandemic because that enabled us, given our geographic position of Mayo Clinic, the ability to see where we had supplies and where we needed to adjust or move supplies. So we never had a supply outage associated with the pandemic.
Yeah.
And we were successful. I'm
Yeah.
proud of the team and very proud of the work they did during those years and proud of the fact that we never had to delay a patient encounter because we didn't have the supplies available to us.
Yeah, goodness. Yeah, what I hear is just this big idea of transparency and transparency to your supply base. My husband's a chief supply chain officer, and so through all of the cycles of supply chain and supply and demand and parts, and I hear all of that. I hear all of that at home as well. So, but one of the things I wanted to transition to is we do a lot of work with Dr. Jim Lee, who is a physician at the Mayo Clinic, and specifically we do a lot of work on leadership. And one of the questions I had for you, Jim, you know, and all of your 25 years and at Mayo and before that, tell me about what are the implications for leadership today, modern, contemporary leadership, and what does it take, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's been interesting in the 40 years I've been in healthcare to watch how we interact with staff and how our leadership approaches to leadership have to change to accommodate the environment and also what's required of working with staff and employees and people. As I mentioned, you know, we're working remotely, so the whole interaction activity with how we talk to and manage people has changed. And it actually requires more effort today than it did just a few short years ago. You know, thanks to technology, we're able to do what you and I are doing today, which is engaging and talking directly with staff, but we no longer have the ability just to touch base or have a side conversation or pass each other in the hallway and do many of the personal activities that you typically have with an in-house environment. You know, developing that connection that's hard to develop with technology. Today, if you want to talk to somebody, you almost have to schedule an appointment and schedule either a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams conversation to relate with people. So it requires more work, you know, than it ever has today. So that adds a bit of formality to the engagement. And personally, I would tell you, there's a sense that I don't think people have as much free time as they used to because your calendars are now filled up with these types of interactions. I would say there have been some positive impacts associated with the pandemic. We now give our employees much more flexibility than they ever have. They're able to work remotely and in some cases work from wherever they want to. So one positive impact has been the ability to increase our pool of candidates that are eligible for positions, many professional positions within supply chain, to a much broader audience. And that increases the depth and diversity and talent that we see applying for supply chain related activities. So likewise, though, your existing staff have more options available to them.
Yes.
So they can go and work someplace else too, much freer than they ever have. So the ability to attract, develop, and retain staff has been, I think, very much impacted by
Yes.
the changes that we've seen.
Yes.
And that has implications for leaders that run supply chains. And things that we have to take into consideration as we adjust our management styles to work with these people.
Yeah. One of the things I heard you say was connection. And what we know is that the ability to have informal connections is much less than it was before on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, the need for connection has never been greater. And when we look at the capabilities that used to be required for leadership, it was things like drives for results, strategic thinking, execution orientation. But what we're seeing now, Jim, and you and I have talked about this, is the leadership capabilities that are in high demand but low supply are leadership capabilities like empathy. And you know, that relates to connection. Leadership capabilities like vulnerability, showing vulnerability as a leader so that others can have psychological safety. The other leadership capability that sometimes people turn their head when I say this is kindness. And if you think about it, we came through, you know, the pandemic. We had a war in the Ukraine. We have many other wars going on right now. We have financial crisis in some locations. And there's so many geopolitical things happening. And then that really impacts, you know, individual leaders. And we never know what's happening in somebody's life. And so when you can lead with kindness and empathy, you're more able to have that connection. Don't know if you're seeing some of that yourself, Jim.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Audrey. You know, like I say, the new work environment doesn't necessarily open up or provide an opportunity to understand what's going on in people's lives.
Yes.
And you know, it seems like it's all business related. You've got 30 minutes to get your conversation in, and
Yes.
many people spend very few precious moments on understanding what's important to people and if there's anything that's incredibly challenging. And I will say that I feel like I miss out on understanding that aspect of human development and interaction with people. And it can be, you know, disappointing, quite frankly, when you don't know what's going on in people's lives and how you can help them. Even if it's just sharing a kind word or being helpful to them in some way. We've lost a little bit of that, no doubt about it.
Yes. You know, one of our dear clients is Baxter Healthcare, and you know, sometimes we'll get on the phone and the executive that we're working with there, she'll say, Audrey, how are you doing? And then the next question she'll say is, how's your daughter? because she knows that my daughter suffers from anxiety and depression. And yet you wouldn't know that unless you asked. And so sometimes we can see, you know, a physical appearance, but we never know what's going on in somebody's life.
Right.
I was coaching an executive woman leader last week. She's a neuro psychologist, and she's one of the largest hospitals in the US. And she was suffering from burnout and suffering from overwhelm and suffering from fatigue. And you know, how might we know, how would you know that this executive woman has this great, incredible title? You think she's get everything together, and yet we all have something going on in our lives. And that's why I think this leadership capability of kindness and empathy is so important.
Again, couldn't agree with you more. Very important in today's environment. And you just have to figure out new and innovative ways to connect with staff. You know, in many cases, leaders don't even know how many children an employee has.
Yes.
And I mean, I know you and I've known you for a while, and you love to talk about your children, which I think is fantastic. So I can relate to you better and often ask, you know, how your children are doing as a result too.
Yes, and you know, one of the things that we say, Jim, is in times of possibilities, leaders go last. In times of vulnerability, leaders go first. So what we mean by that is if you're in a meeting and you're brainstorming, let your team go first. But if there's a moment where you have to show vulnerability, then you have to go first. And often that's why I go first to say, you know, I this is my family and this is my daughters and these are the things we struggle with. And I often go first so that, you know, our clients and our community, that they can feel that trust and that psychological safety. And, you know, I know that your approach, Jim, is very much the same. And you know, my last question as we wrap up here is there anything specific that you're doing with your team to support them through all of the challenges internally and externally, and talking about leadership, and what are you doing to support your team?
Yeah. Well, I try to meet as frequently as I can with my team, first and foremost, given the new work environment. You heard me mention earlier, I have a total of like 1,300 employees, but my direct reports are 10 people.
Yes.
So I meet with them routinely, both one-on-one and as a group. And we do tend to spend some time talking about what's going on outside of our professional lives, either formally as a group or informally, when I might by chance see them. But certainly when I'm one-on-one with a team member, I talk a great deal about their life and how things are going and their children and so forth. So, you know, in the basic aspect of it is just being humans one to one. You know, so it's important from that standpoint.
Yeah.
You know, you heard me earlier say I've been in healthcare a long time. Believe it or not, Audrey, I'll be celebrating my 40th anniversary from graduating from graduate school very soon here. And I, working with staff over the years, I don't think their needs have changed dramatically. You know, staff still want to be compensated fairly. They still want competitive benefits. They want to be appreciated,
Yes.
and they want to be recognized for what they do if they're given the opportunity to do it and lead it. And that's my style of working with people. The only exception I'd say that the pandemic brought to that mix of desires by an employee is the word flexibility. You know, we now, since we have a work from home environment, more staff have come accustomed to the flexibility that affords them. And greater flexibility in the hours that they work, greater flexibility in work-life balance, and just overall well-being, I think has really brought this concept of remote work and how that dynamic of what they're looking for to the surface, and something that we'll probably have to always accommodate from here on out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And maybe if I could link and label what I heard you say, and these are my words, that there's some price of admission things, like being fairly compensated, like, being able to be trained to do the work you need to do. Those are the basic needs. But I also heard you saying that one of the differentiators that you can offer your employees is flexibility. And what we say to leaders when we're working with them is flexibility needs to be highly customized, because Jim, what's flexible for you may not feel flexible for me. And what's flexible for somebody else on your team might not feel like flexible for somebody else. And what we say is that leading employees today, customization is king. And you can't often customize on the price of admission things, but you can customize on the experience. And you can customize on the conversations. And you can customize how you make people feel. And that's full circle back to this connection point that we talked about earlier. So just, Jim, loved our conversation. As a veteran in the industry, we're honored to have you join our podcast. We want to thank you, and we are going to be speaking to you soon. Thank you to all our listeners. You can visit us on www.mcguckingroup.com and hear some of our other podcasts. Thanks, everyone.
thanks, Audrey.